Here in Australia, the Chinese car manufacturing industry is starting to put a lot of pressure on companies from the US, South Korea, Japan, and Europe. They're producing generally high-quality cars with features that suit the local market and prices that are often a lot cheaper. The same thing appears to be happening in audio too. Topping have produced the amazing D900 DAC, SMSL have produced the wonderful PAX and Raw HA1 amps, and Fozzy Audio just keep pumping out the hits. Mostly. Sure, with the exception of the D900, none of these are really premium devices, but there are some different brands from China that are making more premium devices. There's Eversolo, Luxon and Gustard or Gustard, and now Musician want to be in on that conversation too. This isn't the first time I've reviewed a Musician DAC. The Pegasus DAC was quite impressive on sound quality, but the one I had here had a fault and it did take a bit of the shine off the review. Thankfully, like any good brand, Musician are learning and developing new products based on feedback and experience. One of those new products is the rather heavy Musician Draco DAC. The Draco costs just $750 and it's a fully fledged R2R ladder DAC with custom filtering. It provides non-oversampling or oversampling modes, balanced outputs, and even I2S connectivity. That's all for $750, which is less than the cost of a Schiit Bifrost 2. Of course, it does need to sound at least as good as something like a Bifrost 2, and we'll get to that shortly. Before we do though, let's cover off a few more details, and one quick thing I want to mention is this hoodie I'm wearing here. If you've spent any time in the comment section of my videos or other audio related channels, you'll know that not all audiophiles are particularly nice people. Well, this new bit of merchandise in my channel merchandise store is there for you to buy and let people know that you're not a dick. I deliberately made it to be nice and subtle and have a little bit of fun along the way. You can get your Passion for Sound merch, whether it's the well-behaved audiophile or something else, using the links here in YouTube or in the description down below. But for now, let's get back to talking about the Draco. The first thing I should tell you about the Draco is that it was sent to me by Audiophile Audio, but as always, they have no influence over this review. Something else that's interesting to know about is that unlike brands such as Topping and SMSL, Musician haven't tried to bump up the output voltage on the Draco to get better measurement performance. The XLR outputs from the Draco DAC are just 2.8 volts, which is way lower than the industry standard 4 volts. That's for PCM output. For DSD output, it drops from 2.8 volts down to 2 volts. It'll be lower for DSD outputs to allow space or headroom for the ultrasonic noise peaks that are part of the DSD decoding process. Regardless, whether it's 2.8 volts or 2 volts, it's significantly lower than the voltage you're going to be used to from DACs like, say, a Topping or an SMSL. That's not a problem in any way, unless your system's already struggling to get sufficient volume. It just means you're going to have to turn the volume dial up a little bit more. Another thing to be aware of with these outputs is that Musician themselves recommend that you don't connect both the XLR and the RCA outputs at the same time. It's got both types of outputs, but they say you shouldn't use them both at once. That's because connecting both is going to share the signal path across all devices and degrade the sound quality. They also say that you should use the XLR outputs wherever possible because they believe the Musician Draco DAC sounds best via XLR and maybe not quite as good through RCA. I tested that out of interest and I have to agree. The RCA outputs aren't as crisp sounding as the XLR, and they also lack some of the sense of separation and soundstage size as well. If you do happen to connect both the RCA and the XLR at the same time, and that doesn't mean you're actively using both at the same time, but simply connecting both at the same time, will essentially nerf the XLR outputs to make them sound the same as the RCA outputs. That is a little bit disappointing that you can't get the most out of this with RCA and you can't really use it with both connection types being connected at once. But I'm also aware that most people these days, based on the comments I see, are looking for a balanced DAC only. So that would suggest that people are only going to want to use the XLR outputs. And for the record, the sound out of the RCA outputs isn't bad. If you were to buy this and use it only as an RCA DAC, it's going to be okay, just not as good as the XLR. As for what you'll hear from those XLR outputs, the first thing I noticed was a wonderful soundstage presentation. That and the tonality of the DAC. Everything from the Draco sounds very natural and very spacious. You can toggle between the non-oversampling or NOS mode and the oversampling or the OS mode to enjoy a subtle shift in the sound quality, with the NOS mode, the non-oversampling mode, being just a little bit smoother and a touch more spacious. That said, I tend to prefer the oversampling mode for its slightly more precise sense of imaging and slightly better sense of detail or texture. That also translates to what I perceive as slightly better separation of individual sounds within the soundstage as well, so I lean towards oversampling, but both are great, and you can toggle at will. As I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different digital inputs on the Draco, including I2S, and some of those sound a bit different too. Although largely interchangeable and all sounding great, I did find that I2S was the best sound I could get out of the Draco. For example, comparing a high-quality USB input, I2S, AES and coaxial, the I2S input into the Draco delivered just a little bit more sense of clarity and articulation. It's by no means enough that I would stress over it and go hunting for a very specific source just to get I2S, but it's perhaps just a little bit better. I think in most cases the Draco is going to be just as enjoyable connecting with USB, AES, optical or coaxial. A lot of it's going to come down to the quality of the upstream source device. It's also worth remembering that you're only going to know the difference between these inputs if you can compare them directly side by side. In isolation, they're all good enough to be very, very enjoyable. And speaking of comparing things side by side, the sub $1,000 DAC of the moment seems to be the LAiV Micro DAC. Coming in at just under $1,000, the Micro DAC from LAiV is also an R2R DAC and also has I2S input. It's much more compact though, and maybe looks a bit more stylish, but that's possibly as subjective as sound quality. When compared against each other, the extra $244 you'd spend to get a Micro DAC does seem to make sense. The Micro DAC produces a slightly better sense of separation between sounds in the soundstage, and that produces a more natural and realistic delivery in the music overall. But that's also about where the sonic differences end. The Micro DAC is better, but it's not miles better. And depending on your system's ability to create space in the soundstage, depth, and layering, you might not even hear the differences between these on your system. Given the near $250 jump in price from the Draco to the Micro DAC, the Draco's probably going to be plenty good enough for many, many people. But then, if we start looking in the $700 to $800 range, it's hard to ignore the Bifrost 2 from Schiit Audio. Yes, it is harder to get or more expensive to get the Bifrost 2 if you're outside of North America, but the vast majority of viewers of YouTube and therefore this channel are going to be in North America. So let's discuss the Bifrost 2. The Bifrost 2 is actually just a little bit more expensive than the Draco. Depending on which colour you get, it could be $50 more expensive or a bit more. And the Bifrost 2 also has way less input versatility. It has only got coaxial, optical and USB. That makes the Bifrost 2 smaller and sleeker, so there's that argument going for it as well. Listening to both DACs side by side reveals very similar sonic performance. I had both in oversampling mode for this comparison, but both DACs do offer non-oversampling modes too. And no matter how long I listened to both of these DACs across a bunch of different tracks, it was very difficult to spot any significant sonic differences. I honestly think you could buy either and be completely happy. However, if I had to lean towards one as being slightly better potentially, I think the Draco might actually be extracting just a little bit more detail or a little bit more nuance from the music. It seemed to have a touch more to hear in vocals, maybe a little bit more sense of texture in instruments, and it's not enough that I'd declare the Draco the definitive winner, but it's certainly as good as the Bifrost 2, and it might be just a little bit better. At the same time, it has more connection options, and it costs less. Unless you're in the US with tariffs right now, that might change things a bit. And that level of performance and pricing is what I was getting at in the opening of this video. Chinese manufacturers are catching up and catching up fast. Sometimes, particularly historically, the build quality and the after-sales service can leave a bit to be desired, but that's also changing and changing fast. Gone are the days when buying a Chinese audio product was a bit of a lottery. I think I see as many complaints now about US-based products as I do about Chinese ones. And the Musician Draco DAC is a member of that new Chinese vanguard of hi-fi. This is gear that's taking it right up to the established players in the field and doing things as well, sometimes better, and costing less. If you want one for yourself, I put links in the description down below. If you'd rather something even better, I've pinned a video here at the end of the best R2R DAC below $1,000 so you can watch that one next. For now though, I want to send a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and of course to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.